On this video, I've been working through the book of Job in Hebrew. I've been doing grammar as I'm reading it. What I'd like to do on this particular video would be to read the Hebrew text with English translation and commentary. On the previous ones in Job, I've looked at pretty much verse by verse, doing a grammatical analysis. So I'd like to just have these two steps: reading, translating into English, and then a verse by verse commentary. So we're at the point in Eliphaz's speech where he is going to talk to Job about not despising the chastening of the Lord. It reads, Hine ashrei anos yochichenu Eloha umusar shaddai al tim'as. Behold, happy is the man whom God corrects him, and the chastening of the Almighty let him not despise, or may you not despise. As we read this verse, Job is told not to despise the Almighty's chastening, but to view it as discipline. In so doing, God would protect Job and deliver him from his present calamity, and really any future destruction which would come his way. The exhortation then, from verses 17 to 27, sounds very comforting, but behind the idea is the thought that God is disciplining Job for a particular sin. This emphasis of Eliphaz will come dominantly to the foreground in his future speeches. Thus, while the words were meant to be healing, they are rather only an irritant to Job. And so we read then the next verse, verse 18. And that's a lesson for us as we try to help people. We may not know why suffering happens, and we should not follow the theology of Eliphaz. As we move on in verse 18, Ki hu yakiv v'yechbash. That is, for he makes sore and he binds up. Yimchatz v'yadav tirpena. He wounds and his hands heal, or they make whole. As we look at verse 18, notice even though he wounds, he heals again, Eliphaz is saying. We see this same kind of thought in Deuteronomy 32:39, Hosea 6:1, 1 Samuel 2:6. While God wounds, Eliphaz is saying, the one he is disciplining, he also binds and heals the wound. Healing in that day consists largely of external application and bandages. So this is what he's really encouraging Job, or trying to encourage him, which is not going to be much encouragement. So as we move on to verse 19, B'shesh tsarot yatzilecha, uvesheva lo yiga b'cha ra. That is, in 6 troubles he will deliver you. Indeed, in 7 evil will not touch you. So in verse 9, it is interesting, the Hebrew here is an idiom, and he's using a certain number to indicate something important. The increase to the next number increases the force of the meaning here. This idiom is used throughout the Old Testament. We see it, for example, in Proverbs 6:16, 30:18 and 19, and Amos 1:3. It is also amply illustrated in the ancient Ugaritic or Canaanite literature. An example can be found as follows: 7 years may Baal or Baal fail. 8, the cloud rider. And we see this in First Achat, lines 42 to 44. And then another example, El answers in the 7 chambers, from within the 8 crypts. This is Anat 5:34 to 35. So the number 7, which appears here, is used throughout Scripture to picture completeness or something that has come to an end, consummate nature of the thing being discussed. And so God is, or Eliphaz is telling Job, using this idiom, that God will really deliver you in an ultimate and final way after the chastisement takes place. Then in verse 20, he continues, Bera'av padacha memavet, uvemilchama medei charav, or midei charav. In famine, he will redeem you from death, and in war, from the power, literally the hands of the sword, and a way of saying from the power of the sword. So what we are being told here is that God will deliver Job ultimately from his calamities. Death will not claim him in famine, nor will the power of the sword overtake him with God's protective care. And so in verse 21, as the author continues, Beshot lashon techave, velo tira mishod ki yavo. And when you are, or you will be hidden from the scourge of the tongue. Literally, from the scourge of the tongue, you will be hidden. Nor shall you be afraid from destruction when it comes. You will not have to fear potential destruction. God will protect Job from the whip of slander and other destruction which would come against him. The same thought, for example, is found in Psalm 31, verse 20. And then he continues in verse 22. Leshod ulechafan tishak, umechayat haaretz al tira. At destruction and famine you shall laugh, nor shall you be afraid from the beasts of the field. Literally, from the beasts of the field you shall not be afraid. At this point, the author, or Eliphaz, is saying Job would laugh at destruction and famine, which would threaten his essential nutrients, and wild animals would not attack him. Again, he's trying to give encouragement to Job with these words. And so in verse 23, we continue. Ki im avnei hasadeh beritecha, v'chayat hasadeh hashlama lag. Hashelama lag. Let me render this hosh lama lag. For with the stones of the field you shall be in your covenant. In other words, in the agreement between you and God. And the wild beasts of the field shall be caused to be at peace with you. Hosh lama. I'm understanding this is a hofal, a third feminine singular. And so, looking at verse 23, Eliphaz continues further assurance of Job. In verse 23, that the stones would not multiply and hurt his crops, nor the wild beast would plunder them. God's going to take care of him and his crops. And then in verse 24, it reads, Veyadata ki shalom aholecha ufagata navecha velo techata. That is, and you shall know that your tent is in peace. That peace will be your tent. And you shall visit your habitation, but you shall not miss anything. Everything will be kept intact. And when absent from home, the text is saying, Job need not worry, for God will protect his homestead from being plundered or from being destroyed. And so in verse 25, it reads, V'yadata ki rab zarecha v'tze'atzaecha ke'esev ha'aretz. That is, and you shall know also that great shall be your seed, and your offspring as the grass of the earth. So in verse 25, notice Job's descendants will be at peace. Although Job has presently lost his family, Eliphaz tells him that his seed would become great and as numerous as grass. It seems that Eliphaz then is encouraging Job that God would reverse his present state of childlessness with a blessing parallel to what we find in chapter 42, verse 13. As a large family was regarded very highly in the ancient Near East as a sign of prosperity and status, Job is consoled then that this would be his end. And then furthermore, he would have long life. So as we continue in verse 26, Tavo v'chelach ale kaver ka'alot gadish be'ito, or be'ito. That is, you will come unto your grave in a ripe age. Bechelach, in a ripe age, you will come to your grave. As a shock of corn comes forth, as the coming up, literally, of a shock of corn in its season, in its proper season. So Job is promised a good long life. Instead of dying young, he would live out his life until old age. As an ear of corn provides the illustration, as it comes in its season and not before, so the grave will not come has before Job has come to a ripe old age. That's what Eliphaz is saying. And then we come to the last verse, verse 27 of his speech. Hine zod hakarnuha ben he. Shema'ena va'ata da lak. That is, and behold, this we have searched it, so it is. Hear it. Job, Eliphaz is saying, hear it, and you, and know you, for it is good. And you literally know for yourself that this is going to be a good thing as you experience God's chastening. Notice verse 27. Eliphaz then explains his first speech, or I should say concludes his first speech by saying that he has been counseling Job for his own good. And so he is claiming that what he's teaching Job is for his own good. We have similar thoughts in Proverbs 2:4 and 9, chapter 12. The problem with Job, though, or with Eliphaz, is even though he's trying to encourage Job, and even though what he says is very brilliant in a lot of situations, it's not true for Job. I'm reading a statement that is found in the Sonsino books of the Bible, and it's on page 20 by Reichhardt, and it's interesting. It is an eloquent paragraph, we could say. Eliphaz describes the happiness of him who is chastened by God and paints a lovely picture of the blessedness that awaits Job if he but receives God's correction in the right spirit. And yet, Bud calls this the most beautiful and comforting passage in all the speeches of his friends. Yet for all its sweet and soothing eloquence and promise of idyllic peace, the noble rhetoric rings hollow to Job's ear. For its fundamental assumption is that Job's suffering is punishment for sin, and his restoration conditioned on meek submission to God's discipline. Thus the words, which were meant to be healing, make his wounds smart the more. For how could he believe such comforting assurances when his experience taught him only too plainly how God could torture the blameless? This is a quote that Bart Reichhardt gives from Peak, describing what basically Eliphaz is saying in this speech. So it's eloquent, it's beautiful, but the application rings hollow, he says, and I would agree with this, to Job.